Hello, my name is Annette Dalloo, and you are listening to The Heart of You. I am speaking to Angie Decanales, and we are discussing what it means to really love yourself and how that relates to clearing and integrating your shadow. And I want to welcome Angie back to the show.
Hello, Annette. I'm so happy to be back.
I'm so happy to have you back. I am thrilled that we're covering this subject today because it is really important on the spiritual journey. And the subject today is talking about your shadow self and what it means to do shadow work. The reason why this is important on your spiritual journey is because we all have a shadow self. We all have that shadow part of us that maybe we don't want to look at, that maybe we don't particularly like. Those are the parts of ourselves that we actually truly need to look at and to love. We're going to discuss some techniques as well as some reasons why it is important to integrate that shadow. So Angie, I want to actually talk to you a little bit about this because you have done some amazing work with shadow, and you helped me get through a lot of those little bits and pieces of my shadow that I was too scared to look at. You know, there are a lot of pieces of shadow work you can do on your own. And yes, it's difficult work, but sometimes you can get through it on your own. But there are those little pieces of shadow that you have within yourself that maybe you're super fearful of looking at. And you definitely helped me look at those things. I kind of want to just let you speak about what shadow work is and how you go about helping your clients with it.
So, thank you so much, Annette, for discussing this topic today. I think it's very important and above all in spirituality, but most of all, I would like to remind what the shadow is. And according to Carl Jung, Carl Jung is the first psychiatrist that actually talked about the concept of shadow. And shadow, according to him, is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Basically, what Carl Jung pointed out is that in order to face our shadow, we need to become conscious of them. And this is exactly where the issue stands or is, because it is very difficult for one individual to actually be conscious of their flaws, their own shadow, their impulse, because it is a collection of everything that is repressed, all the aspects within our identity that is repressed or shameful or we feel guilty about. But because it is too heavy, our brain, like our conscious mind, choose to actually repress them, just kindly put them aside so
Yes.
that we can live, as being perceived or seen as a good person. And this is what is very interesting. This concept of shadow, in so many levels is very interesting, because we tend to believe that the shadows lives in others, exactly the same way that we tend to believe that the other is the bad person. It would be so easy to actually have a group of bad people and a group of good people, and we would just cast out the bad people and we will be all happy forever. But the thing is that it doesn't really work like that, because as we all know, the human being per se is made out of shadow and is made out of light, because this experience here, this human experience on earth, is about dualities. And the exercise is to actually balance our dualities using our free will. So it's again mind, I would say, but it's also, like the way to true enlightenment. Actually go and face all our flaws, observe it, and transmute it. But as you say, this is not easy. This is not easy, because we need help to understand what our shadow. We need help to come to face this idea and to be at ease with this idea that we are also a mix of good and bad.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because you mentioned transcending duality, which in fact is going to be next week's episode.
Oh, see, I'm a bit of a medium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're going to be diving into exactly what it means to transcend duality, and
Mhm.
doing your shadow work is that first step in being able to do that. Being able to have that compassion, being able to understand what it means to have both light and dark within each of us. Now, you had mentioned Carl Jung, and
Yes.
lots of people in the spiritual community really look to his teachings and look to
Mhm.
his writings about shadow work, because he has written a lot of really wonderful things that can help guide you into what exactly shadow work is. You read something to me earlier about spiritual bypassing, and I was
Yes.
wondering if you could read that for
Yes.
us and do a little bit of explanation as to your take on this excerpt.
Yes. I'm really, as you say, interested about Carl Jung's explorations and concept of the shadow work. So he's naming, like tendencies that we all have, and maybe I could, after, like talking about spiritual bypassing, just, like mention them all. But for us, of course, it's so spot on, like, because we are evolving in this spiritual realm. And Carl Jung was mentioning, like one of the most common flaws or shadow for spiritual people was what he called a messiah complex. And the Messiah complex, what he says is that some people think they're so enlightened that they can do no wrong. And they construe everything they do as an effort to save others. So it's a little bit the savior complex. And this is actually an example of spiritual bypassing, and yet another manifestation of the shadow self, because when you push people to actually see the light without helping them facing their flaws and to make them see you as a savior, it is a way of saying that you are of a greater power, you are a greater enlightened person. And basically, this is something to address as well. And it's the same thing as when, like Carl Jung says also in the philosophical tree, that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So yes, this is really the idea that we cannot avoid darkness. It goes with the light. And based from my own experience, I would say that darkness is the reverse side of the light. It's not the opposite, because darkness is as important as the light in order to be fully complete and fully reach the state of enlightenment. You really need to draw your power, or to draw your balance from the fusion of both of them, from loving, like every part of you, every bit of you. So I suppose that this messiah complex, it's really interesting, because it's an invitation to all of us that works in the spiritual area, and that do healing work or health-based practice. It's really to question ourselves first and understand if we did our own shadow before we gather and just preach people, tell them that the evil is there, but is outside them, and that they will help them fight evil. So if you hear someone from the spiritual community, maybe, like point out fingers at an evil archetype, maybe you should question it. It's
Yeah,
always important to question everything you hear and not take everything for granted, because it's really important to work with people that have this concept that we are everything. We really are
absolutely.
everything, and we have to have this humility. Really, it's compassion, it's gratitude, it's love, it's self-love, but it's also the humility to acknowledge that the shameful other is us.
Yeah. And the really wonderful thing about being able to acknowledge your shadow and integrate it is the fact that you're building your spiritual practice on a solid foundation.
Yeah.
If you are doing your spiritual practice, you're doing your spiritual work. And if you imagine that shadow being the sort of foundation or the base of what you're working with, and that is still not been integrated and it still hasn't been looked at and it hasn't been dealt with, then essentially you're building your spiritual practice upon a foundation that is not stable. You're basing it on something that has not even been acknowledged yet. That is something that I like to look at as, if you bring things back up to the surface and you're able to integrate them, you're building a more solid foundation for your spiritual practice. So when you are triggered by something, your triggers are not going to dig so deeply down into the core of your being that you have these giant reactions to things, that you are going to actually be able to handle the things that you didn't handle well before. And the other thing I wanted to say about the savior complex, which, thank you so much for bringing that up, because it is something that also creates that codependency. If you are somebody who is teaching somebody or trying to show somebody the light, so to speak, and you are sort of teaching in this method of spiritual bypassing, you're basically creating dependency from the other person onto the spiritual leader or to the other person who is trying to teach. What you want to be able to look at is within yourself. It's not looking to another person to save you. And that's something that's super important. And that is actually a really big shadow that is part of our society in general, because a lot of times organized religions can really ramp up this idea that you have to look to another person or another figure in order to be enlightened, which is not the case. You look at the divine within you.
Yes, so true. And in order to look at the divine within you, you also need to look at the shadow within you. And you're completely right, Annette, about this people going to look to religion to find moral, like the moral standard. And there's another thing, like that we can find in Jung shadow work is the fact that society impose so much moral concept on what a human being should be. This concept are always changing, that we had to go to look to religions, like to understand what is it to be a good person. But the problem is that it only tells you what a good person should be, but it
Right.
never tells you how to face your shadow and how to become this more balanced human being, integrating this shadow. And that's why we have, like an heritage of this idea that there is evil and there is good and there is this battle and there is demon. In my therapy, I often welcome people that they have a lot of, like they're struggling a lot in their life because they are almost paralyzed between this concept of evil, and they think they have demons within themselves. And
Right.
this is why we were talking, like most of the time, the demons we think we have within ourselves is just our repressed impulse or our wounds. It's always about our wounds, because every time we are triggered, what we do is that we play out our wounds. So when we point out fingers, when we judge people, when we mock people, or there's a lot of story about trolling on the internet as well, like these people that would
Right.
just like put comment on the internet saying you're an idiot or you're this or you're that. This is really acting out a wound of humiliations. So these people must have, like within themselves, this traumatic experience of humiliation, rejections. And this is the way, like their ego man can actually play out so that they can, like somehow face it. Because no matter what happened, I mean, even whether you want to face your shadow or not, it will come back to you.
Yes, always.
This is what we were saying. I mean, when something is set in motion, like when a trauma is set in motion or a shadow is set in motion, it will always come back to you until you face it and you integrate it and you transmute it. I mean, there's no escaping that.
Right. So, can you actually talk a little bit about what it means to integrate your shadow self?
Yes. So The first thing, I'm going to go back a little bit. So the first thing is that in order to actually be conscious, because this is really, like the first thing is to become conscious, because the shadows live in the unconscious mind and is playing out by the conscious mind through the ego. So it's really about moral. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
in order to be more conscious about your shadows, because some people will say, no, it doesn't resonate with you. I'm a good person. I don't understand this topic. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really about every time you are triggered by something, every time you have a huge reaction, like something, like you hear something or something happen and you just cannot stand it and you have a massive reaction to it, or all of a sudden you are shaming someone because he doesn't know something. This is what we were talking and you shared with me, Annette.
Yeah.
So it's a way of acknowledging that you have shadows. Every time you are triggered, it means that you are playing something out. You are projecting something onto someone else. So, and the other things to recognize and be conscious is that when you're pointing out the flaws of someone else, that's probably because you're sharing the same. So
Yes.
this is
Yes.
something we don't like to hear at all. And we will always say, oh, I really, like my friend always did that. And sure, I just hate it when he did that. But most of the time when we reproach each other things or we fight, we have conflict, it is because we are playing out our wounds. We are projecting by mirror effect our wounds onto each other. Why? It's because it needs to be faced. This way of projecting our wounds onto each other, we just continue forever and ever until we acknowledge it. And so that's probably the best way to actually on your own, like understand if you have shadows or not. Just look at your triggers. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say if you look at your trigger and you identify, oh my God, why did I have this reaction? Like maybe we are going to give an example. I have friends, they are doing a party and they didn't invite me. So what's going to happen is that you are going to project onto these friends, oh my God, they don't want to invite me because they think I'm not good enough, or maybe they're a bad person, or I don't understand, like I thought we were really friends. So what's happening there is that what you're manifesting, these triggers of you, is a manifestation of the wounds of the abandonment,
Yes.
rejections. When you acknowledge that and you said, oh my God, it's true, I feel rejected, because you're just assuming that the people has a certain opinion of you, but actually you don't know anything. It's just your mental brain driving you crazy
Mm-hmm.
and making you assuming things. What happened is that what you should do is just pause. Really, okay, I feel rejected. I know this is a trigger. I pause, I breathe, and I'm going to observe it. Why is this situation making me feel like I am rejected? And so you go in a state of meditation. I would say first thing, like it's observation, identifications of the trigger. So you go within and you just think about when was the time when you felt this way? Who made you feel this way? And by just, like looking within, you will automatically get images, get feelings. And then you will remember, oh, it makes me feel exactly the same way as when, my mom didn't pay attention to me when I was doing that, or my dad rejected me and divorced my mom when. So it is always connected to something deep within yourself. So I would say, yeah, identification of being conscious and identifications of the trigger is the first thing. And then integration. Integration is when we cease rejecting part of our personalities and find ways to bring them forward into our everyday life. It means that we all of a sudden we make peace with it. We know we are this way. We know we have this wound. So when we are facing the same challenges again in our everyday life, we know we may have this tendency to react the same way, but we will not, because all of a sudden we say, no, no, I know what's happening there. I'm playing out my rejection wounds. This is, like it is a very agile, I would say it's a reprogramming. It's everyday reprogramming, I would say, in order to integrate this shadow and be balanced and be okay with them. And as you were saying, Annette, it takes a lot of love and compassion. It's
Right.
okay. Everything, it's okay. We are not perfect being. And facing your flaws will just make your life so much more easier.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do want to mention too that in this scenario that you are giving,
Yes.
there are certain times when, let's say, those friends really are just excluding you for whatever reason. Let's say it's true. Let's say that story is true.
Yeah.
When you're able to integrate that shadow aspect of being rejected,
Hmm.
whether or not they are excluding you
Hmm.
simply doesn't matter,
Yes.
because you're not creating a story around it, because you understand that it actually has nothing to do with you. Their
Exactly.
rejection of whether or not they want you there or not has nothing to do with you and your own self-worth.
Hmm.
It could simply be that maybe they have a different set of friends that they're inviting,
Hmm.
or there could be a myriad of reasons
Hmm.
why that you don't actually know. And so not creating a story around it, thereby making that shadow bigger, is part of that process of what Angie was just saying, which is simply to just take a breath and try to identify where it's hitting that trigger within you. And don't worry about other people's triggers, because that's their own work that they need to do. And
Yes.
in addition, there is the other aspect of, I've had experiences just like you're talking about, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we put somebody different on the thread that we forgot, we forgot to add you. It wasn't a
Mm.
rejection, it was simply a mistake that somebody forgot to add you to a thread. We've had that situation happen. So that feeling of rejection was completely unfounded to begin with. But the reason why that trigger is there is so you can look at it.
Yes, and I want to add something because what you said is very interesting. And in the case of, oh, I just forgot to put you in the mail list, your name wasn't there. This is exactly the kind of synchronicity or bigger challenge that the universe is going to send to you, able to actually acknowledge and face them. So it will always, whether it is someone that will help you to actually face them or your own self, there's always going to be something that will help you, face these challenges.
Yeah, and it's interesting because throughout the course of my shadow work, there was something that I kept on getting the message about,
Mm.
which was there are things that actually happen in reality, but a majority of the triggers that you have are simply the universe's way of presenting an illusion to you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens, is that a lot of times your triggers are simply an illusion. It's your perception of what is happening.
Mhm.
In reality, when you actually get the whole story, or when you finally understand and have compassion for the other person, you realize that everything that you went through was simply the universe showing you what you needed to see based on what work you needed to do within yourself.
Exactly. That is a very good point. What reality really is just perception. It's
Yeah,
just our own unique perception. There is as many realities as there is as beings, human beings.
right.
Because even souvenir, I mean, they're just information going through our own filters,
Mhm.
our own filter of perception. So everything really is about perceptions. And it's about the perception are different according to whatever, challenges you've been facing, or the education, or what society has been telling you. Earlier with Annette, I don't know if you remember, Annette, but we were talking about the issue of racism.
Yes.
We are talking about shadow. I mean, there is so many different level of shadow. There is our own shadows, but there is also the collective shadows. And within the collective shadow, there is the one of racism. And I was reading a very interesting article saying that it's also difficult for the collective to integrate and transmute these shadows because, for example, for America, for a long time, they were built upon the misconception that people of color were less valuable than white people. So the white people supremacy was the moral ethic good way of thinking, for a long time. And
Mhm.
it's not to point finger at all and to shame anyone. It's just to say that depending the time, the place, the culture, the moral and the ethic is completely different. So it's also about, how do you transmute years and years of conditioning people to think that they're doing great if they think they are better if they're white, considering people of colors, less. What happened is that this energy, this inheritance, this energy is it's going through generations, and so in order to be clean or to be faced, it really needs to be brought to consciousness. But it's very difficult for people to say, oh my god, I think I am a racist. Because if you say that, then you might be outcast of the society, because society tells you now, well, being racist is not good. It's not the moral we want to pursue, because we have evolved and we understand now it was a mistake to believe it was a good thing, like to mistreat people in this way because of the color of the skin. Thanks godness, like morality or this conception has evolved, and we have more consciousness about integrating everyone as equal. But for the people for the lineage and the collective of people that integrated these truths, these moral truths, it is important, to actually share them, said, oh my God, I think I am a racist, and I'm sorry, I don't know why, but it's because it's been repressed. So the more you repress it, it's going to stay within the collective, and it's going to be bringing up, like unbalance. And we see it, like it's still an issue
Right.
today.
Yeah, and racism is a something that is so deep rooted
Yeah,
in culture, in society, not only in America but all over the world.
of course, yes.
It is something that needs to be brought up to the surface many, many, many times in order to be cleared. So, when we talk about doing this shadow work individually, and then as you're doing this shadow work individually, you are helping the collective in that case. You have to understand that it needs to come up multiple times, especially something that is so deep ingrained, as Angie is saying, for generations and generations in the lineage, in the ancient lineage. When you are able to bring that back up to the surface, meaning that it needs to be recognized, it needs to be shown, it needs to be acknowledged. And I think what's happening right now is people who are saying, well, I've never been a racist, that's never been me, are starting to understand the systemic racism that is happening, and understand that even though your actions specifically are not racist, the systems you support, the other things that you are doing as far as simply taking advantage of various privileges because you are not a person of color, is contributing, in fact, to systemic racism. So once you have that knowledge of that and understanding what it is that needs to happen in order to clear that shadow, you can actually do something about it on an individual level.
Yes. And, like there's something that you're saying that is very important, individual level. I believe, and this is the commonly shared belief, that it really starts as an individual level, because we tend to believe that us alone, it doesn't make a lot of difference, but it does, because we have a tremendous power that is the ripple effect. So everything we do has a rippling effect. There is a resonance. We are in the quantum field. We think that we believe, as a scientific level, that we evolve in the unified field of energy, and that we are connected all together to the supraconsciousness, and we actually are the field. So everything one individual does in terms of changing himself or evolving will have a ripple effect on the collective, and even beyond. It is said that it has a ripple effect on everything that exists, whether it is nature's animals or even the universe. So the idea is really to say that, really first look at yourself and make the changes your heart wants you to do, or your soul is calling you to actually awake to your full, beautiful way of being. I mean, and integrate all your fragmented parts, whether they are light, whether they are shadows, because The more you do that, the more the collective will be healed. And I think this is really, like, important for the future and in the work we are doing.
Exactly. And especially with your work, Angie, in the quantum field,
Yes.
this type of work is so super important because as you heal what is going on within you right now in this moment, it does have that ripple effect on your lineage, on
Yes.
your ancestry,
Exactly.
on and everything that is going on. So
Mm.
as we know that time is not linear, time
Yes.
is all happening
Mm.
simultaneously. You may feel overwhelmed when you start to do the shadow work. But you have to understand that even if it's just one small piece that you're working on, as you were saying, Angie, like, let's say you're just working on rejection, that one small piece you're working on, not only are you working on it for yourself, but you are working on it for the collective as well as for all of the lineage and ancestral line that you have come from.
Yes. So, in you were mentioning my practice. It's true that I am a hypnotherapist, practitioner, quantum healing. I actually have my own way of doing it now. So it's a mix of all the skills I have developed through also trans channeling. But every time I work with someone, there is something that I do. I mean, it's all the time, and it's almost unavoidable now. And this is what I would say there, but it can be source or whomever you believe. The other, like greater forces we work with is asking us to do is to transmute this low vibrational energy. And I will call them like that because you can name them. I mean, they can be anything, from impulses to wounds to perversion as well. But every
Mhm.
time I work with someone, we are together because it's a co-creation, transmuted so much of the shadows, not only from the person, but for all the lineage. And we clean and we clean and we clean so much. And I can tell you, Annette, that it's for everyone, every person I meet, it's always the same thing. So that's why, like, we cannot really, like, point out figure, because I have never met someone I work with where I didn't have to clean and transmute energies of war or rape or incestuous behavior or perversions like this. I mean, it
Yeah.
can be also, like wounds of rejections, but we are transmuted, like so much in an everyday. And we are doing that for the individual, for the collective, but also for our own earth, for Gaia. Because the more, like we transmute this energy, we work on it, and the work is very hard because we say it is the greater self-awareness, the self-mastery and compassion, but it takes a lot of merit. It takes a lot of courage to do this.
Right.
You remember what I was saying to you. This is, like, to give the people that are listening to us, like, the reason why it is important to do this integration and transmutation of work is that when you transmute fear become courage. When you transmute pain, it become a catalyst for strength and resilience. And when you transmute aggression, it can become a powerful energy to fight and, like, help the world become a greater place. When I have people coming to me and say, I want more confidence, I want more self-esteem, I want to have the courage to do this, or I would love to be a more assertive person, what I would say, this is how. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not only, oh, please reprogram my subconscious of my system beliefs, of my patterns. It goes really deeper than that. It's rooted, like, we have to go down to the roots and understand that if you want to have courage, then you need to transform your fears into courage. And that's how you do it.
Yeah.
And well done for everyone that are listening and wants to do it after, listening to this, to what we are saying, because yes, it is a lot of work. And I will always, and I always welcome in my practice the people that wants to do it. And I will always be so happy to help, like, everyone transmute their own fears and transcend their shadow. And I'm still doing it,
And
uh,
it's a constant thing we're always
yes,
doing, right?
yes.
Yeah, so as long as there is duality in the world, as long as there is shadow within the collective, we will be constantly working on our shadow, right?
Yes, I would love, if you allow me, Annette, I would love to quote from Carl Jung, just to finish on this part of, like wanting to make the world a better place, of save the world. So what Carl Jung said is that if you want to save the world, try to save yourself first. And what he says, and I quote him, it's a quite long quote, but he said, if you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Such a man has saddled himself with new problem and conflict. He has become a serious problem to himself, and as he is now unable to say that they do this or do that, they are wrong and they must be fought against, such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself. And if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic unsolved social problem of our day. And I think this is a beautiful quote to say what we are doing here is not reaching perfection, is being more conscious and offering a balanced way of being, a more balanced way of being for ourselves and for the collective.
And the one thing I do want to mention as well is that even though we are still constantly working on this shadow, we are always doing this work, whether we realize that we're doing it or not. If you can consciously do this work, it will help your life in wonderful, wonderful ways. And I want to make sure that, especially the listeners out there who have never done quantum hypnosis therapy or have never done an Akashic record session, anything having to do with past lives, I want to reassure you that you will never be given anything from the universe, from your guides. You will never be given anything that you cannot handle in this moment. I do find a lot of people ask me, well, isn't it scary to find out things that you did in past lives or to experience those shadow pieces of yourself? And I can definitely say that you are only going to be given what you can handle right now in this moment.
Yes, and when you do it through hypnosis, there is something amazing that happens is that we work with higher consciousness of people, and sometimes they will send symbols. So not to scare the person, what you're gonna get out of your higher self is sometimes cartoons, sometimes
Yes.
symbols, images, and funny references as well. I was channeling for a client yesterday, and they wanted me to understand that she was what abilities she had inside herself, and they sent me the image of Master Yoda, and and I started to laugh, because this is what happened, like when you channel and you connect to the field to get informations. It's the same way, like Annette, when you connect to other people's past life or when you make people experiment it you will always get what you can handle, and
Yeah.
and they're very funny. Your higher self is very funny. It will send you sometimes, like very funny images to not to scare you.
Right, absolutely. I've gotten really interesting images over the course of all of the sessions I've gotten. They use images for us as practitioners that we understand as well. So I have been given lots of sci-fi images or fantasy images like Gandalf or Harry Potter, things like that, simply because that's something that I understand. And the synchronicities that happen sometimes are so beautiful because I'll mention it to the client and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I love that too. And it's like, okay,
Yes,
great. So now we understand each other, right? So
yes,
that's the beautiful part of the messages that the universe will give you, is that not only is it going to be something that Angie's going to understand or I'm going to understand, but it's something that's going to be relating to what you can really accept. And as you say, it gives a little bit of humor as well.
Yes. I was just thinking about the people doing the shadow work. Really want to say that because, of course, like we mentioned that you could start to doing on your own and try to understand what are your triggers and all these things. But I would actually recommend to do it with someone, because there is another very important thing is that when people comes, they start talking. I had people talking to me for the first time about things, secret or thought that was so shameful that they never disclosed it before. Just yesterday, I mean, I had a deep emotional revelation from someone, and this person said, I never told anyone. And all of a sudden she bursted into tears, because of course, it's precious, to have someone that can actually take everything and just transmute it without judging. And like when we were talking about spiritual people practices helping others, that's why also it's important to have balance our shadow, or just to be aware of this shadow work, is because you can take it. I mean,
Right.
you can listen to someone and just embrace and welcome whatever they tells you. You're not judging them. And this is really like the almighty power, is that you start to embrace and love and give compassion to people that are telling you the most horrific things sometimes. And yes, we have to say that because we talk about shadow works, Annette. There is a great deal of suffering because some people cannot repress deep, 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 heavy things. And it is important to find a good person, a good practitioner that will listen to you without judging, welcome your sorrow, welcome your tears, welcome your secret, and just, like take them and transmute them, with all the compassions and all the love that we can have for one another.
And that is the most beautiful way to start helping somebody to transmute those lower
Yes,
energies, that guilt and that shame. So guilt and
yes,
shame are two of the lowest energies you can have.
yes,
And I have also been in that situation as you have, where I have had clients, sort of confess to me that they have either cheated on their spouse or they
yes.
have done something. And I am able to listen without judgment and say, okay, so let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at why that may have happened.
Mhm.
Right. And to be able to hold space
Mm.
for somebody, not judge them, and say to them, you know what, it's okay. Let's work through this
Mhm.
together. And you can do the exploration within yourself to see where this is coming from. That can offer a lot of intense relief
Mhm.
for not being called a horrible person, for not being
Yes.
called a wretched person for
Mhm.
whatever actions, because quite frankly, a lot of those words we give to ourselves
Mm.
within our shadow. We're the
Mhm.
ones that are beating ourselves up for
Mm.
the actions that we do.
Mm.
And to allow yourself the space to say, you know what, we all make mistakes and it's okay,
Yeah.
is absolutely huge to be able to integrate that shadow.
Yes. And there is also something that's very important to understand there, is that even if you think that you're a good person in the definition that the society you're in just give it to you as a moral ethic, and when something happened to you and you act as a reflex, you react to it. You're so most of the time the first reactions, it's not always going to be what you think. There's a lot of people when they react that would show a side of themselves that is very completely the opposite of what they are. You can have someone that is very peaceful and all of a sudden he's in an airport and someone just push him or push them, and he will react like maybe with insult or with violence.
Right.
And when they come back to their senses, they just don't understand what happened. And
Right.
so what happened there is that whole everything you've been repressing just came out because the trigger was too big. And
Yes.
so this is a very important things to say, because that's why sometimes we have good people. We think they're, like good people, and they do horrific things. It's exactly the reason why. It's because it's the impulse are so repressed, and they really want to be a good person, or church telling you, don't do that. Oh, you're a bad person. You must be you should be feeling guilty. You should be feeling shameful. And so will come the day that you will have these massive reactions, and you don't understand where it comes from. Well, where it comes from? It comes from this place within you, where this other self, this shadow self, the one that is being humiliating, or the one that is being traumatized, is hiding, and is just feel threatened, or is or feels that it needs to survive somehow. And so you will trigger this reaction, and this will come out. And that's why it is always better to actually understand and know our flaws and the violence that is within us, and integrated, knowing that you will have less chances that something massive like that can happen or will happen.
The image that I keep on getting is a sleeping dragon.
Yeah.
It is simply a sleeping dragon just kind
Yeah.
of curled up, having a nice nap, and
Yes.
then something triggers it and
Yes.
it just breathes fire
Mm.
and screams and lashes about.
Mm.
And that's essentially what that is that you're talking about.
Yes.
Beautiful. To close up today's episode, I just want to thank everybody for sticking with us. This is a really heavy topic. It can actually really branch out into so many different parts of your life, parts of society. And quite frankly, Angie, I could talk to you about this all day because
Yeah. Yes.
there's so much good information
Mm.
here, so many good sort of tips for our listeners about how they can start doing this work. Obviously, the most efficient way to do this work is to see a practitioner. You can obviously book a session with Angie. Angie, thank you so much for joining me again today and being on the Heart of You. It is always a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Annette. It's always a joy and a profound appreciation of your work and being with you. It's always a pleasure to talk together and try to create a special moment for us, for everyone, and try to make a difference here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful. Sending you so much love, my dear.
Me too. Bye bye.
Bye. I want to thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to walking this journey with you and pointing the way on your spiritual journey. If you are interested in learning more about me and the sessions that I do, feel free to go to my website at infinitesoullove.com. On all social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Infinite Soul Love 1111. Hey, and if you feel called, I would love it if you could rate The Heart of You on whatever streaming service you're using, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please take a moment, give it a review. It really does help the channel. Thanks so much.